those who would solicit a foreign government to try to come in and take over our country or break it up. That's not part of our vision for Canada. That's not Canadian conduct, and in fact, that is, I described it as an old-fashioned word because we haven't had to use it for a long time. In my opinion, that is treasonous activity.
We need to give Albertans hope. We need to show them, not just tell them, not just words, but with actions, that Canada can work. And that's what I've been doing.
BC's Premier, Alberta's Premier there at the First Minister's meeting this past week, after a report suggesting that Trump officials have met with Alberta separatists, something we knew, but that they also discussed money or a potential credit line for that movement. How much of a challenge is all of this to Canada's unity? Could it affect upcoming CUSMA talks? Let's bring in our Sunday Scrum. Stephanie Levitz is a senior reporter at the Globe and Mail's Parliament Hill Bureau. She is still in Calgary, where she's been covering the Conservative Convention. Catherine Cullen was on a very late flight with me, coming back from Calgary. She's the host of CBC Radio's The House, and Rob Shaw is a political correspondent for CHEK News. He joins us from Victoria, and you're up very early, Rob, so you also get kudos. Everybody gets them on this Sunday, a busy weekend here. Steph, I'll start with you in terms of what you made of the conversation around Alberta separatism, both with the premiers, and I don't know what you heard there over the course of the weekend, and that reality and how that played into things. I will say in my conversation with the Premier, I am sort of struck at how she's just, trying to make Alberta better in hopes it all works out. And that to me seems, as I said to her, a little bit risky, but give me your sense.
Yeah, and I'll take the flip side of that. I had a conversation on the floor of the Calgary Convention with Jeffrey Rath, who's one of the folks leading this movement for independence. And he was going through like a very long list of grievances, things that are really annoying and irritating people in the movement. And some of them, Rosie, are so complex and entrenched. Like, it's much bigger than, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith or Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, or even the Prime Minister's efforts to juice the energy sector, right? These are longstanding things about how many seats Alberta has in the House of Commons, equalization payments, issues related to the Constitution. And the frustration he's clearly putting forward, Mr. Rath, it's not a solvable problem, easily. Like, do we want to have another constitutional crisis in this country? I'm not sure the appetite is there for that at this moment in time.
Catherine, what did you make of the way Danielle Smith spoke about it, both just now on this show, but over the weekend too, or during the week, when she had other premiers like right up in her saying, you've got to do more, we can't let this happen.
It's tricky. I mean, I think there are a couple of ways to look at this. On the one hand, as somebody who was born in Quebec, who covered the news there for years, I'm sympathetic to the fact that when people from outside the province start saying, well, your province ought to manage this issue this way, that there can be a little bit of recoil. And so there is perhaps something to navigate there. At the same time, yes, she's acknowledging those concerns. It is politically convenient for her. We have to acknowledge a lot of those people are an important part of the United Conservative Party. And by not squelching the concerns that they are raising, by not saying, as you asked the Premier, Rosemary, why not just say, this is not the best way forward? She said, yes, I think it's inherent in her message, but she could be much forceful. And I think as this situation continues, as the pressure is ratcheted up, she may be forced to go there. I do think this edition of the conversation with Donald Trump, though, is not helpful to those who are seeking Albertan sovereignty, because the idea that Trump is involved, the suggestion of in any way that Alberta itself could become the 51st state, everything I have heard about the conversation in Alberta suggests that would put a great number of people off. So perhaps, once again, another place in Canada where we see that the conversation with Donald Trump has the potential to really shake things up and set a bit of the dynamic going forward.
And Rob, certainly that was the way Premier Eby saw it, that it's one thing to talk to people, it's another to talk money, and to have U.S. officials engaging in that conversation in any way. His language was very stark.
Yeah, he didn't have to say what he said. No. He chose to do it off the top of a scrum before anyone even asked him. And I think he did it to flip the tables back on Danielle Smith after being put in an uncomfortable position over pipelines for several months now. So there's a little bit of payback on that. But, I think the problem, and everyone's highlighted it so far, is that Danielle Smith is tap dancing around the issue, half measures, kind of weaselly little words here and there. She's not definitively addressing it. And that is only a measure you can use for so far before the pressure just increases and you have to say something one way or another. It was more interesting to me to watch kind of the Quebec referendum election issue play out, because you had a lame duck premier kind of telling the other premiers and the prime minister, stay out of this, just leave it alone, don't touch it, there's no win here. And with the exception of Doug Ford kind of wading into it a bit and saying this would be a disaster, most of them kind of left it alone a little bit compared to the Alberta separatism issue.
Yeah, there was some polling, I think it was over the weekend there, that showed that the departure of François Legault is actually having an impact on the Parti Québécois. So that may be why he thinks it's just going to kind of take care of itself. But Steph, give me your impressions of the fact that this conversation is happening as the president continues to do what he does, and surely, someone is watching this and saying, oh, well, look what's happening here. There's some friction inside Canada, and maybe there's opportunity. I mean, that seems like the exact wrong message we want to be sending.
That's exactly it, isn't it, Rosemary? I mean, what do bullies do? They look for weakness, they look for cracks, and they try to pry those open and play sides off each other. And as we head into these talks, if Mr. Trump or his, chief negotiators could say, well, Alberta's feeling vulnerable, Quebec's feeling vulnerable, British Columbia's feeling vulnerable. How can I exploit that? How can I make things difficult so that Mr. Carney is going to have to make choices that will hopefully keep his country together? Conversely, it puts Mr. Carney's back up against a wall, right? And I'll take sort of that third rail of trade negotiations, the supply managed sector and the dairy sector. That's a huge irritant to the United States, the extent to which we control our own, management of the dairy industry. And there's been a lot of calls from the U.S. to change that, to give American producers more access to that. Well, if Mr. Carney was prepared to put that on the table in any way, that would light a fire, a keg under, powder keg under Quebec separatism. And so it becomes very difficult for both Mr. Carney, I think, and the premiers to find a common path forward on trade. There's going to have to be a give and take with America, but then the political domestic repercussions of that give and take might be bigger than they would ordinarily be if other provinces are feeling weaker.
Catherine?
I think one thing in all of this conversation, I mean, the question of how Mark Carney is going to negotiate or navigate the possibility of these two things happening at once. I think you're very right, Rosemary, to say with Quebec, there is very much a wait and see part of this. As we are talking, Bernard Drainville is putting his hat in the ring, announcing his leadership ambitions to lead the CAQ. There's just so many moving parts in Quebec politics right now. But one thing I think a lot of Canadians perhaps have not fully grappled with. The leader of the Parti Québécois, Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon, I mean, to talk about a powder keg, somebody who has a lot to say about the relationship of Canada and Quebec, who takes a very dim view of the federal government in a similar way to what you're hearing from some of the Alberta sovereigntists. But the difference, of course, is that he is an official party leader and that he has the possibility of becoming a premier. So these are going to be very tricky waters to navigate. Doesn't help that Mark Carney clearly upset a lot of people in Quebec when he gave that speech intended to be about national unity. To many people's ears, mischaracterized the nature of the Battle of the Plains of Abraham. Some people may think, why are we looking back to our history books? But that sense that he perhaps fundamentally misunderstood something that is so important to a lot of Quebecers' sense of their relationship with Canada. I mean, my feeling about all of this is it's just like one more area where we have to buckle up because these are going to be complex waters to navigate.
Last 30 seconds to you, Rob.
Well, I think it's interesting to hear Mark Carney continue to downplay, the expectations on CUSMA, that we still have the best deal out of all the countries, which is just a ridiculous line when you think about elbows up, and also that it's a review, not a renegotiation, and continuing to sort of lower the expectations there for the public who might think that we're about to move into some sort of period of stability through this legal review process, when in fact we're still in the same chaotic president late night tweet upends the table on us process, and it's possible nothing changes at all.
My message to those people who have felt unseen for too long, who are carrying the country on their back and feel underappreciated and overworked, conservatives see you and conservatives will fight for you. Hope is on the way for our people as well. But hope is not just a comforting blanket. Hope is the knowledge that your work will fulfill your purpose.
Pierre Poilievre there speaking to delegates at the party convention over the weekend. The Conservative leader received a resounding 87.4% support to cement his leadership of the Conservative Party. Will this give Conservatives some new momentum? Will Poilievre be able to grow that support amongst Canadians? Let's bring back our Sunday Scrum. Stephanie Levitz, a senior reporter at the Globe and Mail. She is still in Calgary. Catherine Cullen is the host of CBC Radio's The House. She's back in Ottawa. And Rob Shaw is a political correspondent for CHEK News, and he joins us from Victoria. Good to see you all again. Catherine, I'm going to start with you. We talked a lot about the big number and how that was, a strong endorsement, gives Poilievre a strong mandate. What happens now? There is some momentum coming out of the convention. People seemed excited. But what does he have to do now to sort of keep that going?
He has a whole host of challenges. And we know that our colleague Olivia Stefanovich talked to the Conservative campaign manager, Steve Outhouse, after this number became public, so in the wee hours over the weekend. He talked about a number of things that they want to do in terms of their schedule, right? We know there's interest in town halls, going across the country, sort of trying to continue with this sense that there's enthusiasm. But the truth is Pierre Poilievre has a whole host of challenges, some of which he has some control over, many of which he does not. You, Rosie, in the reporting you were doing, the broadcasting you were doing over the weekend, talked to Jason Kenney, who said, really liked the speech. One thing it really needed was a direct acknowledgement of Trump, that this is a huge issue for Canadians. Every week there's a new threat that involves our sovereignty, our economy. We know that Mr. Poilievre is likely to have more to say on that topic, but it is difficult to even sometimes get in the conversation for him. There are other factors out there that make things challenging for him as well. The NDP, if that party continues to struggle, of course, they're in the midst of a leadership race right now. We don't know what their political fortunes look like, but without a stronger NDP, things are hard for the Conservatives as well. So he has a number of challenges that he's looking at right now. While Conservatives are really enthusiastic about him, a lot of people who might otherwise think about voting for the Conservatives are not necessarily so keen on him personally. So I think some of that hope conversation you were hearing there is part of their effort at trying to bring some of those people over. But it is going to be a battle, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it was almost, the weekend obviously was a big hurdle to clear, and there wasn't much consternation that he wouldn't clear it, Steph, but there are a lot of hurdles to go to become Prime Minister, and it is a very difficult environment for any politician these days.
You know, Rosie, I stepped out to grab a cup of coffee in between our panels here, and I ran into a Conservative MP. And I said, so, how are you feeling? And this MP sort of sighed and said, guess I better go home and get ready for an election. And there is, this feeling for sure amongst the Conservative caucus that Mr. Carney may take Canadians to the polls this spring. And, speaking on, I'm sure for these MPs on a personal level, they're very tired. Nobody really wants to fight another election. But on a political level, the polls being what they are, support for Mr. Carney being as high as it is, support for Mr. Poilievre personally being as low as it is, the message of hope that Mr. Poilievre is sending, in which we get a glimpse of one way that he's going to try and broaden out his party's base. The other way is a campaign narrative already seeming to form, which is, what has Mr. Carney actually done for you? What change has he actually brought for you? But those two things take time to cement. They take time to hold on in the minds of voters. And I think Mr. Poilievre will be challenged, as Catherine said, to just get into the conversation and start looking like someone who could replace Mr. Carney. He may have a very narrow window to do that, and it might be too hard.
Yeah, I mean, one of the other things that Jason, he was full of advice, Jason Kenney, on the weekend. One of the other things that he said, Rob, was that Pierre Poilievre should look for opportunities to speak on the international stage. Not to undercut the government, but he should, give a speech about Ukraine. He should visit, the United States and help out in some way there. And I wonder, whether that would be part of the strategy, because if you've got the base on board and you've said things to make them happy, how do you get Canadians to feel reassured about him in the idea of in the world as it is now?
Yeah, take on more of that statesman approach for sure. I think that's one way. But there's just a general sort of criticism of people of Pierre Poilievre that haven't voted for him in the past, that he's scary and he's obnoxious. And I think the speech and what we've seen from him in the last few months, doing more interviews, attending the parliamentary, dinner, joking about himself, I think he's making the right pivot here. He has moved away from the slogans in that speech. He has talked less about broken Canada, more about a hopeful Canada. He got emotional talking about his daughter. Those are the right moves, but it does take a while for people to get that image of him chomping an apple and spitting at reporters kind of out of their mind. But you see the path for him, right? In British Columbia, he has run the board on all the rural working class ridings. He has to appeal to the urbanites who are, provincial New Democrats who are scared of him. They're worried about what he will do, including on international issues. And you're right, there is a step he can take there to lower some of that fear.
And Catherine, I guess that's an important point too, that the sort of tonal shift that we've been seeing, not only in the speech, but through action, as Rob says, through speaking to reporters more and putting himself out there a bit more.
Yeah, there are a couple things I would say, Rosie. One, on the question of international travel, it's my understanding that this is something that they've been thinking about, considering their options and when the right time might be to do something like this. But I'd say more broadly, one thing that is interesting to me is that some of these changes that we've seen in Pierre Poilievre have been things he has not wanted to do. My understanding is for a long time he was very resistant to talking about his family publicly, and you can understand in particular talking about your child having special needs, that is perhaps something that many people might not be comfortable putting out there in the public stage, but it's taken him some time to be willing to do that. The conversations he's had with mainstream national media outlets was not something he wanted to do in the past. So he is trying to stretch a little bit further, I think, in hopes that helps warm up some people to him. The question, of course, is whether or not it's enough. If he does go, for instance, and do some of those, some of that international travel, he will inevitably be compared, perhaps, to that Mark Carney Davos speech, right? Which was a high watermark for the Prime Minister. He then came home and, as we were discussing last hour, had some challenges in his speech about domestic issues, particularly as it relates to Quebec. And that is perhaps easier terrain for the Conservatives to be fighting and saying, well, there was a misstep there, these affordability issues. It's more comfortable ground. But he's going to have to, I think, make up some ground on that place where Mark Carney seems to have more of a hold. Pierre Poilievre has been at his best politically in terms of the numbers when he's had control of the narrative. And I mean, when it comes to foreign affairs, let's face it, Donald Trump has control of a lot of the narrative about what's happening in terms of Canada and the world right now.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Steph.
Yeah, I'll pick up on that by saying he's also, of course, challenged by the fact he's not the prime minister. That's right. He is the leader of the opposition, and there's only so much he can insert himself into the narrative because it carries with it risks. I mean, Steve Out has said to me in our conversation on the convention floor about the challenge for Mr. Poilievre is that as leader of the opposition, he is supposed to pick apart what the government is doing. He is supposed to hold them accountable. But when we're trying and talking about holding Mr. Carney accountable for how he's dealing with U.S. President Donald Trump, criticism of that can be interpreted as somebody siding with U.S. President Donald Trump, which isn't fair necessarily, but it's very dangerous for Mr. Poilievre. I do think he's going to go overseas. I believe he's booked for an engagement in the United Kingdom later this year. Whether he follows through with that, I don't know. But he is in this challenging position where, as leader of the opposition, again, he has no control. And where he's been so strong, I think I just want to underscore Catherine's point because it's an excellent one, where he's been so strong is in picking apart the domestic issues and being explicitly able to hang them on the federal government and then propose a solution to that. When the issues facing our country are external, when they demand reaction, that's a lot harder to navigate through.
Okay, I'm out of time, so sorry, Rob, but you'll get more time the next time you're on. Thanks for getting up early, everyone. Steph, safe travels home. Good to see you all. Steph Levitz, Catherine Cullen, Rob Shaw. Thanks, guys.